In June 2025, 6 people were executed for terrible crimes they committed. Each of these cases took many years to go through the courts, with lots of appeals and legal fights before they were finally put to death. Today we're going to look at each of these 6 cases. We'll talk about the awful crimes these people did that got them sent to death row. We'll also share what they said right before they died, what they picked for their last meal, and what happened in their final moments in the execution room. Before we start, I want to know about you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Does your state still execute people? What do you think about the death penalty? Let's have a good discussion in the comments. Now let's start with the first case, a crime so horrible that the police who worked on it never forgot it. Anthony Wainwright. On June 10, 2025, at 6:22 p.m., Anthony Wainwright was executed at Florida State Prison. He was 54 years old and had been on death row for over 30 years for one of Florida's worst crimes. Here's the exact details of the crime. On April 27, 1994, 23-year-old Carmen Gayhart was grocery shopping in Lake City, Florida. Carmen was married with 2 young kids and was studying to be a nurse. She was known for being patient and caring with both her patients and children. 2 dangerous men were watching her that night. Anthony Wainwright and Richard Hamilton had just escaped from a North Carolina prison. They had stolen a green Cadillac and robbed a house, taking guns and money. When their stolen car broke down in Lake City, they decided they needed another car. As Carmen put groceries in her blue Ford Bronco, the 2 men approached her with guns. They forced her into her own car and drove her to a remote area. There they tortured and raped her for hours while she begged for her life, thinking about her children at home. After the assault, they tried to strangle Carmen. When that didn't work fast enough, they shot her twice in the back of the head. They dragged her body away from the road and drove off in her car, leaving her to die alone. When Carmen didn't come home that night, her husband called police. A huge search began across North Florida. The next day, Mississippi police spotted Carmen's stolen car and tried to pull it over. A shootout happened, and both men were caught. During questioning, both men admitted to kidnapping, raping, and killing Carmen. The evidence was strong. DNA, fingerprints, and bullet evidence all proved they were guilty. Police found the stolen guns used in the murder. In 1995, Anthony Wainwright went on trial for Carmen's murder. The prosecution showed DNA evidence, witness testimony, and Wainwright's confession. The jury heard terrible details about Carmen's last hours and how coldly her killers treated her. The jury found Wainwright guilty of murder, kidnapping, robbery, and rape. They unanimously recommended the death penalty, and the judge agreed. Richard Hamilton, his partner, was also sentenced to death but died on death row in January 2023. For over 30 years, Wainwright's lawyers filed many appeals. They claimed problems with his trial, brain damage, and mental disability. They said DNA evidence wasn't properly shared with the defense and that witnesses got deals for testifying. His final appeals went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which rejected them. Even a last-minute appeal filed on the morning of his execution was denied. Wainwright made a final statement, but no one could hear what he said. At 6:22 p.m., Anthony Wainwright was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison near Stark. His shoulders moved a few times. He blinked and took several deep breaths before becoming still at 6:14 p.m. He was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. After 30 years, the Gayhart family finally got closure. That same evening, another execution was happening in Alabama. Gregory Hunt. On June 10, 2025 at 6:26 p.m., Gregory Hunt was executed at an Alabama prison using nitrogen gas. He was 65 years old and had been on death row for 37 years, longer than his victim had lived. He was the 6th person in the United States to be executed with nitrogen gas. On August 2, 1988, 32-year-old Karen Sanders Lane was living in Cordova, Alabama. She shared an apartment with another woman and had been dating Gregory Hunt for about a month. Karen didn't know that Hunt was becoming dangerously jealous and obsessed with her. Hunt's jealousy turned into deadly rage. On that August night, he broke into Karen's apartment, his mind twisted by anger and jealousy. What he did next shocked even experienced police officers because of how brutal it was. Hunt didn't just kill Karen, he tortured her. He sexually abused her and then beat her to death in a long, vicious attack. The medical examiner found 60 separate injuries on Karen's body, showing just how much violence Hunt used against her. The crime scene showed unimaginable suffering. Karen had fought for her life, but she couldn't stop Hunt's anger-filled attack. He showed her no mercy as he systematically hurt her and killed her. Karen's roommate found the horrible scene and called police right away. Walker County investigators arrived to find one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever seen. Karen's beaten body showed the prolonged torture she had suffered. Hunt quickly became the main suspect because of his recent relationship with Karen and because witnesses said he had been acting jealous and strange. Police arrested him quickly as they built their case using physical evidence and his connection to Karen. In 1990, Gregory Hunt went on trial for Karen's murder. The prosecution presented a case that horrified the jury. They heard detailed testimony about the 60 injuries Karen suffered, evidence of sexual abuse, and proof that Hunt had planned the attack. The defense had little to work with against the overwhelming evidence of Hunt's guilt and the terrible brutality of his crime. The jury heard testimony about Karen's final hours and the prolonged suffering Hunt caused her. The jury found Hunt guilty of capital murder. In an 11-1 vote, they recommended the death penalty, believing his horrible crime deserved the ultimate punishment. Hunt spent 37 years on Alabama's death row, making him one of the longest-serving inmates in the state's history. His appeals went on for decades, with his lawyers challenging his conviction and sentence in various ways. While in prison, Hunt claimed he had found religion and led a weekly Bible class since 1998. He told reporters that finding faith helped him get free of his poisons and demons, and that he tried to help other inmates. Just trying to be a light in a dark place, he said. His final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court argued that prosecutors had misled jurors about evidence of sexual abuse, but the court denied his request about 3 hours before his execution. On June 10, 2025, Hunt chose not to eat dinner. For lunch, he had bologna, black nude peas, carrots, and fruit punch, his last meal before being executed by nitrogen gas, a method he chose over lethal injection or the electric chair. At 5:55 p.m., Hunt was strapped to a gurney with a blue mask covering his entire face. Several of Karen Lane's relatives watched the execution, finally seeing justice after 37 years of waiting. When asked for final words, Hunt stayed silent but appeared to give a thumbs-up sign and a peace sign with his fingers. The nitrogen gas began flowing after 5:55 p.m. At 5:57 p.m., Hunt briefly shook, gasped, and raised his head. He moaned around 5:59 p.m. and raised his feet. He took several gasping breaths with long pauses and made no visible movements after 6:05 p.m. Karen Lane's family said the night wasn't about Hunt's life, but about the horrific death of Karen Sanders Lane. They emphasized that Hunt had shown Karen no mercy in 1988. "This is not about closure or victory," they said. "This night represents justice and the end of a nightmare that has coursed through our family for 37 years. John Fitzgerald Hansen. On June 12, 2025, at 10:11 a.m., John Fitzgerald Hansen was executed at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. The 61-year-old's execution was significant because it happened as a direct result of President Donald Trump returning to office and his order to bring back the death penalty. On August 31, 1999, 77-year-old Mary Agnes Bowles went for a walk at the Promenade Mall in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mary was a retired banker who had spent her day volunteering at a Tulsa hospital, helping babies in the intensive care unit. She was known for caring about others and helping people even after retirement. 2 dangerous men were watching her that evening. John Fitzgerald Hansen and his partner Victor Miller, had targeted the elderly woman not because of who she was, but because they wanted to steal her car for planned robberies. As Mary finished her walk and headed to the parking lot, Hansen and Miller approached her. They kidnapped the defenseless 77-year-old woman from the mall parking lot, forcing her into her own Buick at gunpoint. What started as a simple evening walk turned into a nightmare that would end in terrible violence. The two men drove Mary in her stolen car to a dirt pit near Owasso, Oklahoma. There, their crime spree got even deadlier when Gerald Thurman, who owned the dirt pit, saw them on his property. Miller shot Thurman, who died from his injuries about 2 weeks later. But the violence wasn't over. In a ditch near the dirt pit, Hansen shot Mary Bowles 4 to 6 times, killing the elderly woman who had done nothing but try to stay healthy with an evening walk. They left her body in the ditch, where it wouldn't be found for days. After the murders, the stolen Buick broke down when the two men went to a motel in Tulsa. They left the car there, but their brief crime spree had already killed 2 innocent people. The discovery of Mary Bowles' body started a massive investigation by Tulsa County Police. The abandoned Buick at the motel provided important evidence, and investigators quickly identified Hansen and Miller as the killers. Both men were arrested and charged with murdering Mary Bowles and Gerald Thurman. The evidence against them was strong. Witness testimony, forensic evidence from the crime scenes, and the abandoned stolen car all proved their guilt. During the investigation and trials, the question of who actually pulled the trigger became important. Hansen always denied being the shooter, with his lawyers arguing there was strong evidence that Miller was the one who actually shot Bowles. However, prosecutors successfully argued that both men were equally responsible for the murders, regardless of who fired the shots. The planned nature of their crime spree and their joint participation in kidnapping and murdering 2 innocent people made them both eligible for the death penalty. In 2001, John Hansen went on trial in Tulsa County for the murders of Mary Bowles and Gerald Thurman. Hansen chose not to testify at his trial, leaving his defense to his lawyers, who argued he wasn't the actual shooter. The jury found Hansen guilty of both murders. For Mary Bowles' murder, he got the death penalty. For Gerald Thurman's murder, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A 2006 resentencing trial upheld his death sentence. His partner, Victor Miller, was initially sentenced to death for both murders, but those sentences were thrown out on appeal. Miller, now 62, is serving life in prison without parole. Hansen's case became complicated by federal charges related to the robbery spree. He was serving a life sentence plus 82 years at a federal prison in Louisiana when Oklahoma wanted to execute him. He had been scheduled for execution on December 15, 2022, but the Biden administration refused to transfer him from federal custody to Oklahoma. President Biden opposed the death penalty and had reduced the sentences of 37 of the 40 people on federal death row in December 2024. Everything changed when President Trump began his second term. On his first day back in office, Trump issued an executive order restoring the death penalty, stating it was U.S. policy to ensure capital punishment laws are respected and faithfully implemented. Oklahoma's Attorney General sought Hansen's transfer, which happened on March 1, 2025, weeks after Trump took office. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 on May 7 to deny Hansen clemency. At his hearing, Hansen told board members he wasn't an evil person, saying he was caught in a situation he couldn't control and responded incorrectly due to fear. His lawyers argued he was autistic and easily manipulated. An Oklahoma judge granted a temporary stay on June 9, but the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals ruled the judge lacked authority to do so. On June 12, 2025, Hansen didn't request a specific last meal, eating the regular prison meal of chicken pot pie, fruit cups, rolls, and carrots. He declined a sedative before his execution. The execution began at 10 a.m. When asked for final words, he spoke quietly, saying either "just forgive me." The execution took only 10 minutes, making it one of the fastest in Oklahoma since lethal injections resumed in 2021. Steven Stanko. On June 13, 2025 at 6:34 p.m., Steven Stanko was executed by lethal injection at a South Carolina prison. The 57-year-old con man had spent 20 years on death row for crimes that shocked Murrells Inlet. Stanko was a master manipulator who told elaborate lies about being a millionaire restaurant owner with an engineering degree. In 2005, he lived with his girlfriend and her 15-year-old daughter in Murrells Inlet. His girlfriend didn't know he had served 8 years for kidnapping and trying to kill another girlfriend in 1996. On April 8, 2005, Stanko revealed his true nature. In the middle of the night, he crept into his girlfriend's 15-year-old daughter's bedroom and sexually assaulted her for hours. In unimaginable cruelty, he pinned the girl down and forced her to watch as he strangled her mother to death. After killing his girlfriend, Stanko drove 25 miles to Conway to the home of Henry Lee Turner. Turner was a 74-year-old retired Air Force Master Sergeant who loved welcoming people into his home. Turner had met Stanko when helping with computer problems. Turner's daughter described her father as very trusting and very welcoming, qualities that made him an easy target. Stanko fatally shot Turner, whose body was discovered 24 hours later. The elderly veteran became the second victim of Stanko's murderous spree. After the murders, Stanko fled, triggering a nationwide manhunt. For 4 days, authorities tracked him across state lines as he continued lying and manipulating people. The manhunt ended in Augusta, Georgia, where Stanko was found with Masters golf fans. He was calling himself Stephen Christopher and lying about his wealth. In 4 days, he had charmed a woman, moved in with her, and attended church with her. She said he was the nicest, most courteous young man, the woman's grandmother told reporters. You would never know he was a fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. The 15-year-old survivor provided devastating testimony about the sexual assault and witnessing her mother's murder. Forensic evidence linked Stanko to both crime scenes. During investigation, Stanko's 1996 conviction came to light. He had soaked a washcloth with bleach, put it over a woman's mouth, tied her up, and left her to die. She managed to escape. The jury heard heartbreaking testimony from the 15-year-old survivor, who sobbed recounting the night that destroyed her family. They learned how Stanko exploited Turner's trusting nature to commit murder. Stanko was convicted and sentenced to death for Turner's murder, plus a separate death sentence for his girlfriend's murder. Stanko spent 20 years on death row, claiming to have found religion and tutoring other inmates. His lawyers argued his life should be spared due to brain damage from various injuries. His appeals argued South Carolina's execution methods were cruel and unusual, but courts rejected these arguments. For his last meal, Stanko requested fried fish, fried shrimp, crab cakes, baked potato, carrots, fried okra, cherry pie, banana pudding, and sweet tea. Stanko prepared extensive final words. He wrote, "We are not the sum of one moment in time. We execute people for moments in their life. I have lived approximately 20,973 days, but I am judged solely for one." He detailed his accomplishments as a youth, claiming he was an honors student, an athlete who saved a drowning child. He hoped his surviving victim and victims' families would forgive him, saying, "The execution may help them. Forgiveness will heal them." He concluded that not a single day had gone by that the victims weren't in his thoughts and prayers, and if his execution helped with closure, he hoped they could move forward. The execution proceeded without incident, and Stanko was pronounced dead at 6:34 p.m. Thomas Lee Godinez. On June 17, 2025, at 6:13 p.m., Thomas Lee Godinez was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison near Stark. The 51-year-old had spent over 30 years on death row for one of Central Florida's most brutal crimes. In the early morning hours of May 24, 1994, Michelle McGrath was enjoying what should have been a typical night out in Central Florida. The 23-year-old was last seen at a bar called Barbarella's shortly before 3 a.m., likely preparing to head home after an evening with friends. Thomas Lee Gudinas had been at the same bar that night with his own group of friends, but while his companions left together, Gudinas stayed behind. His friends later testified that they had left without him, leaving him alone in the area where Michelle was last seen alive. Several hours after Michelle was last seen at Barbarella's, her body was discovered in an alley next to a nearby school. The crime scene revealed evidence of serious trauma and sexual assault, showing that Michelle had suffered unimaginably before her death. The young woman had been raped and murdered, her life cut short by senseless violence. The investigation began immediately after Michelle's body was discovered. A crucial break came when a school employee who found the body identified Gudinas as a man who was fleeing the area shortly before the discovery, placing him at the scene around the time of the murder. The case was strengthened when another woman came forward with disturbing testimony. She identified Gudinas as the person who had chased her to her car on the same night and threatened to assault her. This testimony showed a pattern of predatory behavior and suggested that Michelle may not have been his only intended victim that night. The combination of witness testimony and physical evidence created a strong case against Gudinas. His presence at the bar, identification by witnesses fleeing the crime scene, and testimony about his threatening behavior toward another woman all pointed to his guilt. Forensic evidence from the crime scene also linked him to Michelle's rape and murder. In 1995, Gudinas faced trial for Michelle's rape and murder. The prosecution presented devastating evidence, including witness testimony placing him at the scene and forensic evidence linking him to the crime. The jury heard about Michelle's final hours and the brutal nature of her death, learning about the sexual assault she endured and the violence that ended her young life. After deliberating, the jury convicted Gudinas of rape and murder and recommended the death penalty, believing his actions warranted the ultimate punishment. Gudinas spent over 30 years on death row, filing numerous appeals. His lawyers argued that lifelong mental illnesses should exempt him from execution, but the Florida Supreme Court rejected this argument. The court ruled that case law protecting intellectually disabled people doesn't apply to other forms of mental illness or brain damage. Federal appeals argued that the governor's discretion in signing death warrants violated constitutional due process rights, but the U.S. Supreme Court denied his request for reprieve on the day of execution. On June 17, 2025, Gudinas had one visitor, his mother, and did not meet with a spiritual advisor. The execution began at 6:00 p.m. when the curtain opened, revealing him already prepared with an IV in his left arm. After the warden confirmed no stay had been granted, Gudinas made his final statement, which was inaudible but appeared to reference Jesus and repentance. The lethal injection drugs were administered, and witnesses observed as his eyes rolled back and he had slight chest convulsions. After several minutes, he lost color and became still. The warden announced the sentence had been carried out, and Gudinas was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. This execution marked another chapter in Florida's use of capital punishment, bringing closure to a case that had haunted Michelle McGrath's family and the Central Florida community for over 3 decades. Richard Gerald Jordan. On June 18, 2025 at 6:16 p.m., Richard Gerald Jordan was executed by lethal injection at Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. The 79-year-old Vietnam veteran had spent nearly 5 decades on death row, longer than any other inmate in Mississippi's history, for kidnapping and murdering Edwina Martyr in a violent ransom scheme. In January 1976, Richard Gerald Jordan was a Vietnam veteran struggling with severe post-traumatic stress disorder after serving 3 back-to-back tours. However, understanding of war trauma was limited in 1976, and PTSD was not widely recognized or treated. Jordan's crime began with a calculated phone call to Gulf National Bank in Gulfport, Mississippi. He asked to speak with a loan officer, and when told Charles Martyr could help him, Jordan hung up. This wasn't a banking inquiry. It was reconnaissance for a kidnapping plot. Using the telephone book, Jordan looked up the Martyr's home address and went to their house, where he kidnapped Charles Martyr's wife, Edwina. He took her to a remote forest area and fatally shot her. But his cruelty didn't end there. Jordan then called her husband, claiming she was safe and demanding $25,000 for her return. Charles had no way of knowing his wife was already dead. When Edwina's body was discovered in the forest, the investigation quickly focused on Jordan. The phone call to the bank, combined with other evidence, led to his arrest and charges of kidnapping and murder. During his 1976 trial, Jordan's defense was hampered by the limited understanding of PTSD. His lawyers couldn't present evidence about his Vietnam experiences and psychological trauma. The jury never heard how war trauma might have affected his mental state and behavior. The jury convicted Jordan of kidnapping and murder, sentencing him to death. At the time, few understood how his military service and untreated PTSD might have contributed to his actions. Jordan's case went through a decades-long court process, including 4 trials and numerous appeals. His lawyers argued he was denied due process because he never received assistance from an independent mental health professional who could have helped present evidence about his Vietnam experiences. A recent clemency petition to Governor Tate Reeves emphasized Jordan's severe PTSD, arguing his war trauma should have been considered during his original trial. However, Reeves denied the request. On Monday before his execution, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final petition without comment. The execution began at 6:00 p.m. on June 18, 2025. Jordan's wife, Marcia, witnessed the execution, along with his lawyer, Chrissy Nobile, and spiritual advisor, Reverend Tim Murphy. His wife and lawyer were seen dabbing their eyes during the proceedings. Jordan lay on the gurney with his mouth slightly open and took several deep breaths before becoming still. He thanked everyone for conducting the execution humanely, apologized to the victim's family, thanked his lawyers and wife, and asked for forgiveness. Eric Martyr, who was 11 when his mother was killed, attended the execution. Speaking beforehand, he said, "It should have happened a long time ago. He needs to be punished." After the execution, Keith DeGry read a statement on behalf of Martyr's family. "Nothing will bring back our mom, sister, and our friend. Nothing can ever change what Jordan took from us 49 years ago." Eric Martyr rejected arguments about Jordan's PTSD, saying, "I know what he did. He wanted money, and he couldn't take her with him." Jordan's execution ended nearly 5 decades of legal proceedings, making him one of the longest-serving death row inmates in U.S. history. The executions carried out in June 2025 represent some of the most serious crimes in American history. From Anthony Wainwright's brutal murder to Richard Gerald Jordan's calculated killing after nearly 50 years on death row, these cases show the ultimate consequences of terrible crimes. Each case brought closure to families who had waited decades for justice, while also raising questions about the death penalty, mental health, and the criminal justice system. If these executions touched you in any way, like this video and subscribe to this channel for more death row and execution cases.